Under the chandeliers of the Harrington Hotel ballroom, Alexander Ward stood like a shadow among glittering lights. His presence was commanding but cold, the kind of presence that didn't need to announce itself. People knew who he was, the billionaire investor who built empires and broke them with the same casual indifference. A man feared more than admired. He was dressed in a tailored black suit, cufflinks gleaming like small knives in the light, his glass of whiskey untouched at the table. The gala around him buzzed with laughter and shallow conversations. The wealthy of the city, politicians, heirs, CEOs, leaned back in their velvet chairs and sipped champagne as if it were water. Alexander barely listened, but then a conversation at the next table pulled him in. "Give them money and they'll waste it," one man said, his voice dripping with mockery. "Hand a janitor a fortune, and you'll see them buying flat-screen TVs and sneakers by the dozen. They don't know the value of wealth." The table erupted in cruel laughter. Another woman chimed in. "Exactly, it's in their nature. People like us are built to manage wealth. People like them, they're built to serve." Alexander's jaw tightened, though his face betrayed nothing. He had made his fortune on the belief that people were predictable. Greed, fear, ambition, it was all the same in the end. And yet there was something in the arrogance of those voices that stirred something unusual in him, something that almost felt like defiance. He leaned back in his chair, his mind racing with an idea, a test, a cruel little experiment perhaps. He would not argue with them. He didn't need to. He would prove it, with real people, with undeniable results. The very next evening, long after the offices in his glass tower had emptied, Alexander descended to the lower floors where few executives ever dared to go. The cleaning crew had just begun their shift. The smell of lemon polish filled the air, and the sound of vacuums hummed against the marble hallways. 4 women, their uniforms simple, their hair tied back, moved quietly through the space. Ghosts in the billionaire's empire, seen but never acknowledged. They froze when Alexander appeared. He never came down here, not once. His shoes echoed against the tile, polished leather against scuffed linoleum, until he stopped in front of them. "I have something for you," he said, his voice calm but carrying the weight of command. From the inside pocket of his jacket, he withdrew 4 black cards. They gleamed under the fluorescent lights, more powerful than keys, more dangerous than promises. He held them out, one by one, and placed them in their trembling hands. "These are credit cards," he continued, "unlimited, no restrictions. Spend what you want, how you want, no questions asked." The women stared, wide-eyed, almost too stunned to breathe. One laughed nervously, another whispered, "This has to be a trick." But Alexander's expression never softened. "The only condition," he said, his voice lowering, "is that I will be watching. Every purchase, every choice. Make of it what you will." And with that, he turned and left, his footsteps fading into silence. Back upstairs, alone in his penthouse office, Alexander poured himself a glass of whiskey at last. He looked out at the city stretched beneath him, a grid of lights and lives he believed he understood. This would be his proof. He would show them all that money corrupts, that people are bound by greed no matter where they stand. Yet, as he set the glass to his lips, a faint unease brushed against him, an instinct he couldn't explain. Somewhere deep inside, he felt the faintest whisper, "What if you're wrong?" And for the first time in years, Alexander Ward wondered if his own test might turn against him. The morning after Alexander Ward's strange experiment, the 4 women gathered in the staff break room of the Ward Tower, their uniforms still damp with the smell of bleach and soap. The hum of the vending machine filled the silence as they stared at the glossy black cards resting in their hands. They looked less like gifts and more like heavy stones, carrying a weight none of them knew how to name. Marisol was the first to break the silence. She was small, her dark hair pulled tightly into a bun, her tired eyes rimmed red from too many sleepless nights. She turned the card over in her hand, shaking her head. This can't be real," she whispered, her accent soft but firm. "People like him don't give people like us things like this." Her voice caught for a moment, and though she didn't say it out loud, everyone in the room knew what she meant. Single mothers from Mexico who worked 2 jobs to keep their children in school weren't handed miracles. Linda snorted, leaning back in her chair, though the nervous way she twisted her wedding ring betrayed her unease. She was in her 40s, the kind of woman who joked her way through life's storms because the laughter kept her from crying. "Unlimited money?" she said with a forced chuckle. "Please, it's probably a prank. You swipe that thing, alarms will go off, and men in black suits will drag you away." The others laughed softly, but it was hollow, the kind of laughter that breaks too quickly. Carolyn sat across from them, her hands folded over her lap, the card untouched on the table in front of her. She was older, near retirement, Her shoulders stooped from decades of bending and scrubbing. Her face was lined not with vanity, but with sacrifice. Her husband's health had been failing for years, and she carried the weight of both their lives on her back. She said nothing for a long time, only staring at the card as though, it might bite her. Finally, she murmured, "I don't need games. I need insulin and groceries." Her words fell heavy in the air. And then there was Danielle Harris. She sat quietly at the edge of the table, the youngest of the group, her card held firmly between her fingers. Danielle was 27, her skin a rich shade of brown, her posture straight despite the exhaustion in her eyes. There was a stillness about her, a calm that unsettled even the others. She hadn't spoken once since Alexander had appeared in their hallway, placing the black piece of plastic in her hand as if it were nothing more than an envelope of instructions. Now, with all three women staring at her, waiting for her to say something, Danielle finally looked up. Her gaze was steady, unflinching, her voice low but certain. "It's real," she said. "How do you know?" Linda asked, her tone sharp, defensive. Danielle's lips curved into the faintest hint of a smile. "Because men like him don't waste their time playing tricks. If he gave us these, it's because he wants to see what we'll do with them." The others exchanged wary glances. "Then what are you going to do with it?" Marisol asked quietly. Danielle slipped the card into her pocket, her hand lingering there as though to protect it. Her eyes lowered to the floor, but her voice carried, strong enough to echo in the silence. "I'll know when the time is right." The others didn't understand her answer, not yet, but they could see the conviction in her face, the way her calm seemed to silence every doubt. That night, as they returned to their mops and dustpans, the black cards burned in their pockets like secrets. Each woman carried hers differently, Marisol with trembling hope, Linda with a shield of humor, Carolyn with quiet desperation, and Danielle with something none of them could yet name. High above them, in his penthouse office of glass and steel, Alexander Ward watched through security footage, a faint smirk on his lips. The game had begun. He believed he knew how it would end. They would fall into greed, as everyone always did. He was certain of it. But in the shadows of that break room, as Danielle tightened her grip on the card and whispered a silent promise to herself, the first thread of his certainty began to unravel. The days that followed were a strange mixture of tension and disbelief. None of the women quite trusted the glossy black cards in their possession, yet the weight of possibility pressed on them with every shift. Cleaning the glass walls of Ward Tower or scrubbing the marble floors felt somehow different, as if their lives had been tilted on a new axis. Each carried the card in her pocket or purse, and each wondered what line she would dare to cross with it. Marisol was the first to test hers. On a humid Thursday morning, after dropping her son at school, she walked into a toy store she had never dared step inside before. The smell of fresh plastic and the sight of shining bicycles filled her with both awe and fear. Her hands shook as she picked up a small Lego set, then a backpack shaped like a superhero. The cashier rang them up, and her voice cracked when she slid the card across the counter. For a moment, she thought alarms would blare. Instead, the cashier smiled and handed her the receipt as if it were the most ordinary transaction in the world. When Marisol handed her son the backpack later, watching his small face light up with joy, she cried into her hands once he ran into the other room. Linda moved more boldly. She'd always dreamed of feeling what it was like to walk into a boutique without worrying about price tags. One Saturday, she strolled into a department store with polished floors and chandeliers overhead. Her heart pounded, but her laughter covered it. She picked out clothes that actually fit, shoes that didn't pinch, and for the first time in years, a dress that made her feel beautiful. At the checkout, she swiped the card with a flourish, half expecting the cashier to sneer. Instead, the woman simply bagged her purchases and wished her a good day. Linda left the store laughing, though when she got home, she folded the dress carefully into her closet, still tagged, as though afraid to believe she was allowed to keep it. Carolyn's turn came quietly. She went to the pharmacy, her list long and painful. Insulin, blood pressure medication, special supplements her husband's insurance no longer covered. The cashier read out the total, a number that made Carolyn's knees weaken. She slid the black card forward with trembling hands. Approved, just like that. For the first time in months, she walked out with a full bag of medicine instead of a half order, tears rolling silently down her cheeks. And then there was Danielle. Alexander had expected her to be the first, the one who would indulge. He'd studied her face that first night, young, guarded, with a certain sharpness in her eyes. He thought she'd be the most reckless. But days passed, then a week. Danielle never swiped her card. She worked her shifts quietly, went home, and returned without fanfare. Frustration gnawed at Alexander. Through his private surveillance, he watched each of the women. He saw Marisol clutch her son to her chest, Linda twirl in front of a mirror in her new shoes, Carolyn held her husband's hand as he slept peacefully with his medicine close by. And he saw Danielle, walking home each night through a neighborhood of cracked sidewalks and broken streetlights, her card unused, untouched. One evening, unable to restrain himself, Alexander asked his assistant, "Has Harris made a single purchase?" "No, sir," came the reply. "Not one." Alexander leaned back in his chair, the city glowing beneath his glass windows. His experiment was unfolding. Exactly as he had predicted with three of the women, small greed, fleeting indulgence. But Danielle's refusal unsettled him. In the silence of his office, he poured another glass of whiskey, his jaw tight. What was she waiting for? Alexander Ward had never been a man who tolerated mysteries. In his world, questions had answers, numbers balanced, and people behaved exactly as he expected them to. Yet Danielle Harris was beginning to undo that certainty, thread by thread. He watched her through reports his private investigator delivered in crisp folders, each page filled with timestamps, photographs, and mundane details. Danielle left Ward Tower after her late-night shifts and boarded the same worn-down city bus. She got off in a neighborhood where the streetlights flickered and the sidewalks cracked. She lived in a small apartment above a laundromat, the kind of place Alexander would have once dismissed as invisible. But invisibility was the wrong word for her. Wherever Danielle went, she carried a presence that resisted being overlooked. The investigator's photographs showed her stepping into a small church basement 3 nights a week. Children crowded around her, their notebooks open, their faces tired but eager. Danielle sat with them, explaining math problems, helping with reading, her hair pulled back and her sleeves rolled up. She never carried shopping bags, never swiped the black card tucked in her wallet. Instead, she carried books, groceries in brown paper bags, or sometimes just her quiet determination. Alexander studied those photographs late into the night, his whiskey untouched at his side. What unsettled him wasn't just her refusal to spend. It was her calmness, her lack of need for what he had dangled in front of her. She was supposed to break. Everyone broke eventually. One night, curiosity overcame him. He left the polished heights of his tower and stepped into her world. His chauffeur protested, but Alexander silenced him with a glare. The car pulled to the curb near the church basement, and Alexander sat in the shadows, watching through the window. Danielle was there, just as the reports had said. She stood before a whiteboard stained with old marker lines, explaining fractions to a boy who looked no older than 10. Her voice carried warmth, patient and steady. When another child coughed, she paused, offering him a bottle of water and a smile that seemed to make the entire room softer. It was a different universe, and Alexander was an intruder. For the first time in years, he felt like a man looking through glass at something he didn't own, couldn't control. The following evening, when Danielle finished mopping the marble lobby of Ward Tower, Alexander appeared from the shadows. She nearly dropped her mop when she saw him. "Mr. Ward," she said carefully, her voice calm but guarded. He studied her for a long moment before speaking. "Why haven't you used it?" His tone was sharp, demanding, the way he questioned brokers and executives in boardrooms. Danielle straightened her shoulders, the mop still in her hand. Her gaze didn't falter. "Because I haven't found the right thing to buy." His brows furrowed. "Are you afraid? Do you think it's a trick?" She shook her head slowly, the faintest trace of a smile tugging at her lips. "No, I know it's real. I also know that money is a mirror. It shows who you are. I'm just not ready to see my reflection in it yet." For the first time in years, Alexander had no immediate response. He was a man who measured people by their choices, their hunger for gain. But Danielle's refusal was not weakness. It was something stronger, something he could not name. That night, alone in his penthouse, Alexander sat in silence, staring at the untouched glass of whiskey by his hand. Her words echoed in him, an unfamiliar weight pressing on his chest. Money is a mirror. And for the first time, he wondered at what his reflection might reveal. The marble floors of Ward Tower gleamed beneath Danielle's mop, but Alexander's thoughts were far from the polished surfaces around him. Ever since her words, "Money is a mirror," he found himself restless, unsettled. It wasn't enough to watch her. He wanted to understand her. No, he needed to. So he did what he always did when faced with a puzzle. He dug deeper. Files landed on his desk, pieced together by the private investigator who had never failed him. Birth certificates, school records, photographs. He opened them late at night, the city lights burning below his office like an endless constellation. Danielle Harris had once been a top student, graduating high school at the top of her class, a scholarship to study biology at a state university, a dream of becoming a doctor. And then abruptly, the record ended. No degree, no continuation. Instead, a job history that read like a slow descent. Waitress, retail clerk, cleaning staff. At first, Alexander assumed laziness, a lack of discipline. But then came the photographs, hospital documents, a mother diagnosed with cancer, bills piling high, treatments denied by insurance. Danielle had dropped out her second year of college, taking on every job she could find to pay for her mother's care. By the time her mother passed away, the scholarship was gone, the dream buried with her. And in the years that followed, Danielle had raised two younger siblings almost single-handedly while still working nights to survive. Alexander sat back in his chair, the file open before him, his chest tight. He had seen bankruptcies, court battles, ruined men on trading floors, but nothing about this file looked like failure. It looked like sacrifice. It looked like strength. The next evening, he couldn't help himself. He lingered in the lobby as Danielle finished her shift. She seemed startled to see him waiting. "Mr. Ward," she said, her voice cautious. "Walk with me," he replied. It wasn't a question. They stepped out into the night air, the city humming around them. Alexander, usually a man of sharp words and blunt orders, found his voice strangely unsteady. "I read about you," he admitted. Danielle's lips pressed together, her eyes narrowing. "You had someone dig through my life?" "I needed to know why," he said. "Why someone like you is wasting away cleaning floors when you should be a doctor by now." For a moment, silence stretched between them. Then Danielle stopped walking, turned, and looked him straight in the eye. Her gaze was not angry, it was steady, fierce, and unflinching. "Because life doesn't always ask what you should be," she said softly. "It asks what you're willing to give up. My mother needed me, my siblings needed me, so I gave up my dream." She paused, her voice catching, but her face stayed composed. "And I would do it again." Her words struck him harder than he expected. He had never given up anything, not for family, not for anyone. His empire was built on taking, not sacrificing. And yet here stood a woman who had given everything and carried herself with more dignity than anyone in the gilded ballroom he had left behind. They walked in silence after that. The city seemed louder somehow, the honking of cabs and chatter of late-night crowds echoing in Alexander's ears like reminders of a world he no longer understood. That night, lying awake in his penthouse, Alexander stared at the ceiling and realized something he had never thought possible. For the first time in his life, he envied someone, and it was a woman with nothing but a black card she refused to use. The weeks stretched on, each one pulling Alexander deeper into a tension he hadn't felt in years. Business meetings blurred together, contracts signed with his usual precision, but behind every handshake and every calculated smile lingered the same question: when will she use it? Danielle carried the black card with her everywhere. He knew because his investigator had followed her steps, and he had seen the way her hand occasionally brushed against her pocket, as though reminding herself it was still there. But day after day, she returned to her modest apartment, her world unchanged. Then, one gray afternoon, Alexander's phone buzzed with a message. "She's moving." He dropped everything. Within the hour, his car was parked outside a downtown bank. Through the tinted window, he watched Danielle push open the heavy glass doors. Her face was calm, almost serene, though her grip on her bag was tight. Inside, the marble-floored lobby was quiet, filled with the low murmur of tellers assisting customers. Danielle stepped up to the counter. Her voice, though soft, carried a resolve that made the teller's brows lift in surprise. "I'd like to make a payment," she said, "on the mortgage for New Hope Community Church." The teller blinked. "The entire mortgage?" "Yes, pay it off completely." She slid the black card across the counter. For a moment, the teller hesitated, almost unsure she had heard correctly. Danielle's eyes, steady and unwavering, left no room for doubt. Alexander sat in the car, his chest tight, his breath shallow. The investigator's microphone picked up the exchange, each word slicing through the billionaire's disbelief. The transaction went through, just like that. A crumbling church in a forgotten neighborhood, a place where children gathered in a basement to learn and eat warm meals, was no longer at risk of being shut down. Danielle exhaled, her shoulders sagging with relief. But she wasn't finished. She walked across the street to an electronics store. Hours later, delivery trucks followed her back to the church. Alexander, still watching, saw computers being unloaded, stacks of books, even medical supplies, items carefully chosen, not for luxury, not for herself, but for the dozens of children who had once clung to her lessons under flickering lights. Inside the church, the children squealed with joy as the new computers were set up, their small hands hovering over keyboards as though touching treasure. An elderly pastor wept openly when Danielle told him the mortgage was gone. She stood in the center of it all, her smile quiet, her eyes wet, her card still clutched in her hand. Alexander had seen men spend millions on yachts, watches, and penthouses. He had watched them flaunt their excess like trophies. Yet never, not once, had he seen money wielded like this, with such precision, such selflessness. Back in his car, Alexander realized his hands were trembling. He poured himself a glass of whiskey from the minibar built into the door, but it burned differently this time. It wasn't the warmth of victory or the dulling of emptiness. It was something else, something raw. For the first time in his life, Alexander Ward had been outplayed. Not in business, not in war, but in humanity, and it left him shaken to his core. The following evening, Ward Tower's lobby gleamed under its rows of golden lights. The marble was spotless, the air cool and still, yet Alexander felt a storm brewing inside him. For a man who prided himself on control, over markets, over empires, over people, he was startled by how little control he felt now. Danielle Harris had changed the rules of his own game. He waited for her. Not in the shadows this time, but in full view, leaning against the massive glass doors, as though the building itself belonged to him, which of course, it did. But when Danielle walked through the lobby carrying her mop bucket, she didn't glance at the polished steel or the chandeliers. Her eyes fell on him instantly, calm and certain. "You've been watching me," she said before he could open his mouth. Her tone wasn't accusatory, merely factual. Alexander straightened, his jaw tightening. "I have. And now you know." She set down the bucket with a quiet thud, her face unreadable. He studied her, every inch of her. "You could have bought yourself anything, a house, a car, a future. Instead, you paid off a church's mortgage and bought computers for children you don't even share blood with." His voice sharpened. "Why?" Danielle tilted her head slightly, as if weighing whether to answer. When she finally spoke, her words were steady, measured, almost gentle. "Because I know what it's like to grow up without a safe place. I know what it's like to need someone who believes your future matters. That church kept me fed when I was a kid. It gave me books when I couldn't afford them. And those children..." Her voice broke just slightly, but she caught it. "They deserve more than survival. They deserve a chance." Alexander felt the words like blows, though she spoke them with no intention of harm. He opened his mouth to argue, but nothing came. He wanted to call it foolish, sentimental, short-sight. Yet standing there, watching the fierce steadiness in her eyes, the words withered in his throat. "You think money is a mirror," he said finally, echoing her earlier words. "So what does this say about you?" Danielle didn't flinch. She held his gaze. "That I refuse to let it define me. Money is power, yes, but power without purpose is nothing." The silence that followed was thick, charged with something Alexander hadn't felt in years, vulnerability. He hated it, yet couldn't step away. He realized then how hollow his own empire felt compared to what she had done in a single day. "Do you know what men like me are called in this city?" he asked suddenly, his voice low. She studied him for a beat. "Feared," she said simply. He gave a humorless laugh. "Exactly. Feared. But you're not afraid of me, are you?" Danielle shook her head, her eyes unwavering. "No, because fear isn't respect, and respect can't be bought." Something inside him cracked then, though he would never admit it out loud. For the first time, Alexander Ward stood before someone who wasn't blinded by his wealth, his status, or his power. Someone who saw him not as a titan, but as a man. He felt small, exposed, and strangely, for the first time he didn't want to walk away.